Okay, well, welcome everyone to the 2026 Virtual Orchard Meetup series. We're glad to have you, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening for folks on the East Coast and this afternoon for everyone on the West Coast. So I'd like to note the series is sponsored by a national team of researchers and extension specialists working on a multi-year USDA SCRI project focused on evaluating management strategies to reduce crop losses from severe cold and heat events. So it fits in with our series this year, focusing on heat events. This large collaborative effort is known as SPARK. So some of you might have heard of it already. It stands for Strengthening Pear and Apple Resilience to Climate. And last week we talked about weather and issues with weather patterns and weather monitoring. And tonight's focus is going to be looking at mitigation strategies in the field and focusing on timings and trade-offs related to heat stress. So first, I'd like to introduce our team of organizers for the webinar series. We have Lindsay King from British Columbia and Christy Grigg McGuffin from Ontario. We also have Daniel Weber from Penn State University and Mario Miranda Sazo from Cornell University and Bernardita Sallato and Sonia Hall from Washington State University. So I wanted to just share a couple things too. If you're interested in learning more about the Spark series, you can find that information at the sparkscri.com that's on the screen there. And with that, I think we'll move into information about the first two presentations. So as we start our series tonight, we'll have two presenters, and then after their presentations, we'll move into a time of Q&A. We're fortunate to have panelists from across the continent with folks in the US and in Canada. So we'll hear from them to hear about their experiences. So we'll start our series tonight with Bernardita Sallato. I'm sorry, Brad Palmer is the first speaker, and he is from Reality Research in New York as their research manager. And then after that, we'll hear Bernardita Sallato, who's the tree fruit extension specialist with Washington State University. So with that, Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, first I want to say thank you for asking me to be a part of the meeting today. So what we're going to be discussing today is different management strategies on apples, and we're located in Western New York. So again, that's primarily where this information's coming from. So we're going to be talking about heat stress, sunburn, and also color development. And I guess the first thing I want to mention is, this information that I'll be discussing doesn't just come from me. This really comes from a lot of my mentors within the industry. Again, we work with a lot of people in our area, and but then we'll also be talking about some personal experiences as a grower, and then also from our research trials that we've conducted. Kind of leading into my discussion here, one of my mentors that has a call-in service, he always starts the meeting with the weather forecast. And why that is because weather affects everything that we're doing in this industry. So with that, I'll move into the talk. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is heat stress. And when I think heat stress, I think abiotic stress. Okay. With that, when we have high temperatures, typically what we see that effect, or the effects from high temperatures is typically in leaf wilting, scorched leaves, and even leaf drop. And ultimately, what that kind of means to me is a reduction in photosynthesis, which is our energy source, which we know that affects, again, just about everything that we're doing out there in the field. With that, some of the management strategies that I feel are important. The first one is kind of a general thing, but as growers, we know that anytime we're making an application, we always make sure we're not having to apply in temperatures above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, because then we know we're putting ourselves at risk, and especially within that, and slow drying conditions can really be detrimental with certain things that we're applying. And then the next thing I kind of think about is, different things that we use within our programs to help mitigate stress. And so some of those things are seaweed extracts, amino acids, even yeast extracts. We've seen silica-based products also be very beneficial in dealing with stress tolerance. The other things that come to mind are copper usage, because again, especially in young non-bearing trees, we've seen as growers that again that copper applications can reduce photosynthesis, reducing tree growth. So again, that's something that we're aware of. The other thing that we are mindful of are SAR products, because again, those are normally they're asking or pushing the tree to make a response. So in that, we're just careful in those high heat situations when that tree is potentially stressed, to not, again, have any negative effects coming from that. The other thing that we are careful of is and mindful of is our summer pruning. We try to find windows either when we're not in a high heat situation or high UV situations when we're going out to do that task. So moving on from there, the other side of that is not just heat, it's a cold stress. Um, but I guess one of the other extreme challenges in that is when we are in our dormant period in the winter months, and we have all of a sudden we have bursts of high heat, high temperatures that can prematurely push our buds. And that always scares us as growers, because we know that's setting us up for potential freeze damage. And honestly, we've seen that more and more through the past 10 years, and especially through the past 3 to 4 years. Um, and then, with those cold temperatures, what we tend to see is more bark splitting. We can see crop loss. We can see fruit finish problems, misshapen fruit. We can even get leaf drop when we get really severe cold damage early in season. Um, and then also even during bloom, if we have those cool temperatures, pollination is also a challenge. And then one of the other things I was thinking about going into this talk right now is something I left out is obviously cool temperatures also can majorly affect our fruit thinning efforts as well. Some of those management strategies, again, to try to deal with some of these things are obviously wind machines. We've been hearing more and more about helicopter usage. But again, we know those really work when there's actually an inversion layer. And we don't always have that. Um, and then the other thing that we are learning more about is it's important to know the root stocks that you are buying or that you are putting underneath your varieties, because some of those root stocks we've learned that they can either push early in the season. So again, those trees are waking up quicker and again could be more problematic for cold events. We've also seen certain rootstocks push later in the season, which then they're also vulnerable to not shutting down in time and having more bark splitting scenarios. Then the other thing we know is even down to the varieties that we're growing, they also have different tolerances as well, uh, for cold stress. So then that really comes into knowing your farm and, knowing where those cold spots are to, best position and set up your orchards, accordingly. Um, and the other big thing we've seen as growers is, we try to do everything we can to avoid invigorating our trees coming out of dormancy. So again, on fall foliars, we try not to use any type of nitrogen sources in those timings. All right, that's what I really got on heat stress. So now I'm going to be moving into sunburn. So again, Emily on the last talk, talked a lot about different forms of sunburn, and she did a great job with that. So, as she said, sunburn necrosis comes early in season. So for that, really what growers tend to do in our area is target their application starting at like the 30 millimeter fruit timing. And the other thing we know with that, coverage is important. When I'm talking about coverage, that's more gallons per acre, just making sure we're getting those trees covered appropriately, but then also potentially adding an organosilicone surfactant to those applications can also be beneficial. And for targeting, specific areas in the canopy, we find that, the upper two-thirds of the tree is more important during that time than the lower third. So again, a lot of times we'll renozzle our sprayers accordingly. And then moving on from there, as we get into the season, when we start thinking about summer pruning or potentially mylar uses, then we tend to find more issues of sunbird browning, so that's more the fruit that are exposed to the sunlight. And then also the photooxidative sunbird, and, where that's fruit that were not exposed to the sun and have more of a likely chance of getting burned, especially we'll see that more with using things like Mylar. The other thing that we've seen is there is some products that we use that can degrade the cuticle layer of that fruit and again make that fruit more vulnerable at that point. So some of the strategies in that is even in our research trials, we've seen that it's important to apply products, sunscreen materials, but both immediately before summer pruning and after summer pruning, to really have a good positive effect. Sometimes when we just went afterwards, we didn't always have the best luck. Um, and also for mylar usage, again, it's just like us, if we're going to be out in the sun, for the day, and maybe some people even want to tan, but even that you want to tan, again, you still want to put on sunscreen. Well, that's same for our apples, when we're using something like mylar, we really should be protecting those fruit prior to putting that out. And again, coverage is important. Again, adding an organosilicone is beneficial. And at those times, we're targeting the whole tree because we're increasing the light exposure, to that whole canopy. So some of the different products, foliar products that have been used in our area is more kaolin clay, so that's like your surround or calcium carbonate like Pure Shade or calcium acetate plus calcium carbonate, which is reflections, and then also some wax materials like Rainox have been used, and then also we've looked at some phospholipid type products, so cuticle enhancers like Parka. And, a couple of things that we find kind of consistent among these products is usually lower rates tend to do better. Sometimes when you overdo those products, you can actually have more fruit finish issues than doing nothing. Um, and then the second key point there is, fruit residues aren't desired, when, putting our fresh fruit over the packing line, for them to try to scrub off the calcium carbonate or killing clay is not always fun, as you see in the picture. And the other thing that we honestly learned with some of those products is, when some of these first 3-row sprayers in our area came out with really good coverage, they picked some of these products to show how good a coverage these sprayers have. And one of the things that was found through that is when you get perfect coverage with products, again, like the kaolin clay or calcium carbonate, you can actually strip that waxy layer right off that fruit, and it almost feels like sandpaper in your hand. Another point that was brought up to me from a local consultant um, is that there's been some market changes where now there's zero tolerance for, I don't want to screw more morpholine, which is an additive typically used within waxes or polishes or protective coatings. So again, just make sure you do the background on the products that you're using and knowing um, uh, the buyers that you're moving the fruit to. So that's what I got on sunburn. Hopefully, I'm not moving too fast. So then now we're going to talk about color development. Um, Lack of cover makes up the biggest call portion that we see in the fresh fruit, especially within our data sets that we're doing. Most packers in our area tell me that the minimum grade is 60% fruit color, which has changed. When we first started selling Honeycrisp in our area, they were selling fruit with what they call 30% or even less color at times. But every time we got a new sport of Honeycrisp, even on our personal farm, I think we got 6 different sports of Honeycrisp. And obviously that was all due to color. So every time we put one of those in the marketplace, now the color demands went up for the original strain of Honeycrisp that we were growing. So what impacts fruit color? What we find is early season energy, photosynthesis, impacts color. We all know crop load impacts color, and I'll say to that we've seen it on both sides. Either obviously a heavy crop load makes sense that can hurt fruit color, but we've also seen where low crop loads also can hurt color. And because again, you still got to remember these apples are sources of photosynthesis sinks as well, especially early in season. The other thing that we know is an open canopy. Getting greater light interception in these trees are very important for color development. Tree stress uh, has another play. And then obviously we all know nighttime temperatures pre-harvest is also very important to get our color development. So through that, some of our management strategies there are abiotic stress products. Again, especially early in season on the development stages, again, to try to allow our leaves and our early fruits to gather as much photosynthesis energy as possible to set that tree up to handle that crop. And again, that proper crop load management, and then also fall and summer pruning. So in our fall pruning, some of the big things we learned is we don't want to stack limbs on top of each other, where we're automatically start shading fruit at that point. And then obviously summer pruning, to again, clean that up and get better light interception. The other thing that's definitely taken hold in our area is reflective materials. Both, and we see both Mylar and Extend being used. Kind of what I do see trending that way is early season varieties in our area tend to do better with Extend. The Mylars sometimes can be a little too hot, aggressive on those fruit, where we've seen, it raise temperatures on fruit almost 20 to 30 degrees at times. So again, we find Mylar actually to perform a little bit better on the later season varieties. And then again, to try to deal with that tree stress, again, similar to the heat stress, we're using seaweed extracts, amino acids, yeast extracts, silica-based products, and even micronutrient combination products to help that. And then we do use different nutritionals and PGRs to again help bring out as much color as possible. Some of the products that we use foliarly out there in our programs um, are, one of them is blush. Again, when that first came out, everybody kind of thought of it as red dye number 7, and it's, that's not what it is. It's really a plant growth regulator. Um, and then what we found is it really enhances the process that's happening at that time. So if that fruit's still pushing chlorophyll, then that's most likely what you're going to enhance. But if you're hitting that when the chlorophyll is degrading and the anthocyanins are expressing themselves, then you're going to enhance the anthocyanin production. And to learn that, we use a DA meter to help find those best application times. We realize not everybody has one of those. So over about 5 years of testing, what we've noticed is if you're having warm nighttime temperatures, late in season, that poor coloring, you really got to be in that 1 to 2 weeks prior to harvest to get a positive response with blush. Yeah, and at a low rate, you typically in those situations. When you're having, and I screwed that up, I see. When you have cool nighttime temperatures, then you can actually be in more in that 2 to 3 weeks window with blush. The other things that we see benefit is a product called Aurora, which is more a micronutrient package that's more dealing with zonal chlorosis in the leaves on Honeycrisp. And again, it's kind of taking some of that stress off, but we do see that increasing fruit color, and that's more back at the 10 or 8 and 6 weeks pre-harvest. Another product that we've seen good benefits with is Crop Set, and that's more the extracts, the yucca extract, and different sulfates in there that are really help stimulating the natural plant processes. And that we tend to apply 3 weeks before harvest. And then Trufos Mag, Nesium, again, now this is more on the nutritional side as well. And they're really using phosphorus to kind of trigger, um, this implement, and then also the mag side. And typically that's applied at 2 weeks and 4 weeks pre-harvest, but we have also seen growers apply that within days to harvest and get positive responses. So with that, hopefully I wasn't too long-winded. But again, I really want to thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of the conversation today.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. Appreciate all that information there and your experiences, Brad, in New York. So if anyone has questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat. Sonia already mentioned that in the chat as well, but if you've got questions for our speakers or our panelists, you can put those in the chat. So we'll go to our next speaker, Bernardita Sallato.
Can you hear me and see the screen okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Thank you, Emily, for the introduction and for the opportunity to share what we do here in Washington. Brad did a great job in talking about some of the things that I will cover in this presentation, so that that will help me to go a little bit faster in those topics. So I am Bernardita Sallato, Tree Extension Specialist, and I have several projects that I will cite here. And the first one I want to share that this picture is not AI developed, it's actually a real picture of in a project that we did in Honeycrisp for heat mitigation. So so just for context, I would like to share with everyone that is not located in Washington, some information about where we grow most of our fruit. This is a map of the whole state in Washington state, and the darker red areas, of course, relates to higher temperatures, and that's precisely where most of our fruit is grown, thinking about apples, cherries, and stone fruit. So the summer heights in the last 5 years have been between 39, 44 degrees Celsius, 102 and 112 Fahrenheit. And it's a very dry area. So the agriculture is mainly an irrigated agriculture. We have less than 8 millimeters of rain throughout the year, and it's very dry with low relative humidity. So a lot of you have covered this topic. Emily did a great job in the last session last week on covering about talking about the sunburn and the different type of sunburn damage. As Brad mentioned now, also we see that heat stress can reduce green color development, and so we have more green in the more chlorophyll rather than anthocyanins, and so it can affect color development, affect the plant stress. Brad also mentioned those related to that will relate to other components in terms of fruit size, for example, or fruit storability. And we also know that heat stress of those fruit that were exposed to heat or sunburn that don't get the damage that you see in this picture, for example, and actually made it to the storage, can actually develop other type of post-storage disorders like water core and sun scald. So the fruit quality is very much affected by different aspects of heat damage. I don't want to leave cherries outside of the conversation. Here we had a situation years in 2022, actually we had a heat dome where we have a lot of fruit like this one. This is a China that were completely scorched during harvest because of heat stress. But we also know that there's the post-harvest impact of in cherries that affects the induction of the following year's crop and creating this problem called doubling in cherries. So the main focus of this talk was to discuss about what are the mitigating practices that Washington growers are using, and some of brainstorm ideas that I would like to pose there for the discussion that we have with the growers later. Brad talked about the sprayable. This is a very common practice. We use very similar products here. I'm listing just a few. Surround, for example, the one in the picture is Surround applied just a couple of days ago in a Cosmic Breeze orchard. We have calcium carbonate-based films. Eclipse is a very common one. Diffusion is one very much used here in Washington, and others. UV blocking like Rainox, and we also have growers that are using Parta. So I'm not gonna stay too much in this mitigation practice. I do want to share that what Brad also just shared is that the control of these sprayables are generally comparable maybe to netting in many cases, but not as strong or high as it is with other practices. The other challenges that we might face with these sprayables is the marking or fruit staining, or just the hard to remove these, especially when we apply those close to harvest in the packing house. There's also some concerns that might come with the compatibility with other sprays that we might be applying, or with the use of other mitigating practices. So for example, if you apply a product and then you want to do overfed cooling, there's some incompatibilities there that growers need to be aware of. And one of the other things that I have heard from growers is the concern of this early application of sprayables that might be reducing the photosynthesis. Thank you, Laura is doing some drawings in my presentation. Daniel, maybe you can take care of that. Um, then another technique is the use of shadings, and we have multiple configurations for shading in orchards. The ranges of shade will vary widely. I have these ranges here of what we have read and reported and investigated between 12 and 25% of shade. So it's a quite a range there. There's also photoselective trials. Licalsics did several of those trials in the past with Stefano Musacchi and others. And remains the most commonly used is white, and appears to be the one that has more benefits and less impact on fruit color development. And here, just to have a look here of the type of configurations that Washington growers are using. The first one is this shade netting in an angle that you just put in the west side, which is the side that is more exposed to sunburn. So we have a lot of orchards using this system that is it's not a permanent one, so the growers can retract and expand as the conditions become worse. The second one is a picture of a cosmic crisp block. This is very common, probably I would say for those that are using netting. This has become the most common strategy, which is not a permanent setting, it's more a retractable setting, so the growers can manage that only during the heat season, so it doesn't affect color development. But we also have structures like the drape net that covers the entire trees, and this is probably more economic, and also enables to use this in settings where you don't have the infrastructure of a whole over tree canopy coverage. What are the concerns that we have found with the use of netting is, well, first of all, is the initial cost is can be up to 10 times higher than other practices. Also, there's an additional cost related to the deploy and retraction of the netting, and this is probably a good conversation to have with the growers in the call. It does affect the color development, especially we think about those that are not retracted. So we have seen impact on reduced color development. And we also have experience with reduced crop load, which we would love to continue investigating and finding out what are the reasons. Even we see that in retracted ones, so not necessarily related to the pollination period. I just wanted to cite here a work that I see that Basavaraj Amoji is in the call, and I would love for him to share some of the experience and results that we had in a project funded by the Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission, led by LabCot, where we actually investigated and compared between these different strategies. Now, Brad mentioned this, and I'm glad that he did, because when we do some of these mitigating strategies, especially thinking about the netting on top of the canopy, we do have this impact on the color distribution and color development in tree fruit orchards. So we use, as Brad also mentioned, these two are extended or a white reflective cover, and also we have mylar type of things that growers will use to overcome the technologies that we use for heat mitigation. These techniques, of course, can increase the cost if we start compiling them throughout the season and for the whole production. And as Brad also mentioned, one caution that I would like to make, that we don't see the sunburn due to the white reflective covers like extended, but we have seen this impact when we use mylar, especially in sites where we are using overhead cooling, for example, and we have mylar. When we have these pools of water on top of the mylar, it really is a lens that enhances the the reflection of the light. And you can see here, this is cosmic grease that tends to be less susceptible to sunburn compared to other varieties like honey grease, but still we were able to see this important damage. So growers are managing this by poking some holes in the mylar so they allow the drainage of that water. Okay, now let's move to a practice that I think are widely used here in Washington or in the Pacific Northwest, but maybe not as common in the east side. These are what we call the overhead cooling or evaporative cooling systems. This is a picture from TJ Mullinax from Good Fruit Grower, which is probably an older style of overhead cooling with a different type of sprinklers. There's a lot of variety in this system. There's a lot of mechanism and strategies. In most cases, growers are doing cycling of the overhead cooling. Garrett can share what he has seen with the growers he worked with, and the other Garrett can share what he's doing in his orchards in terms of cycling, so on and off. And here growers are using both. Some of them are using the thresholds. They're establishing the threshold based on either air temperature or fruit surface temperature. And in the last session, Lab Code talked a lot about what we are doing in the WSU Smart Farm Orchard to validate and compare these different techniques for growers. What are the concerns that we have? Kirti spoke in the last session about the water availability. Of course, that is a concern, especially some areas in Washington. Now we have a very limited amount of water. In the last couple of years, we have drought and less water available for management or crop systems. So that is a big concern. But also thinking about food quality, we know that excessive irrigation can have large impact in food quality. We know, and we have evaluated this in another project also with the same team, with Lapcot, Carolina Torres, and Basa Baraj, where we had increased fruit disorders. This is a honey grease, and of course, bitter pit disorders are increased with excessive irrigation, excessive vigor, which translate also into reduced color development, or having problems with biennial bearing the following season, excessive nitrogen, and in this case is the relationship with the overhead cooling is because some areas have well water with quite high levels of nitrate in the water, and we have an example that a grower in Marua, an area that actually is very exposed to heat, were putting up over 70 pounds of nitrogen just with the overhead cooling. So that has large impact in fruit quality. And as Garrett Bishop mentioned in the last meeting, some problems with rots depending on the soil texture of the orchard. There's still, again, concerns that might come from food safety, so the quality of the water in terms of pathogens. This is probably one technique that is newer in Washington, and one that we've been evaluating in the Smart Orchard project, that is also led by LabCot. And there's a lot of work done by Shrikant Gorti, which I hope is in the call, and Data Balekar. He's not in the call today, but we've been evaluating these fogging and misting systems in apple orchards. The mechanism is slightly different from the overhead cooling or evaporative cooling. It uses both. There's the benefit of evaporative cooling, but also convective cooling through the air. Initially, this system was, the growers had to use it as continuous, so not cycling, but actually we have learned through the Smart Orchard project that cycling can be beneficial in many ways, in food quality, but also in the save of water. And for this technique, the same, as we do for overhead cooling, we use air or fruit surface temperature to guide the turning on and off of this system. I put an asterisk there in the water use efficiency because it depends on how you use the fogging system. You might or not save water. So, for example, in the first trials that we did in 2022, when we compare with overhead cooling and we had continuous fogging, you need to start the fogging before the threshold that you would use overhead cooling. And in those cases, you actually don't reduce water because you also have to account for the additional water that you will require for irrigation. So accounting for all the water use, actually, if you do continuous fogging, you don't save much water, but you do prevent the negative impact of the overhead cooling in terms of excessive water application or water into the soil or the ground. The concerns with the fogging system is that it does require more infrastructure than you do with a sprayable, for example, but it's a lot less than what you would use for netting. The water quality is super important because if you have particles in the water or alkaline waters with high level of bicarbonate, you have to make sure that you don't have these plaques in the nozzle. So it does require infrastructure on that end. There are concerns about the wind, so the impact of wind in the fogging system. Now, in most cases, when we have wind, growers don't do overhead cooling or fogging because the wind actually helps to prevent heat stress. And the other concern that we have very little information about is how this affects the microclimate, and that can lead to, especially probably in the east side, might impact the disease or other fungal diseases that are that lies in this climate of hot and moist in the canopy. I'm about to finish here. I hope I'm not going too far into the meeting now, but the most common actually will be a combination of all these practices. There are growers that are using netting and hogging. The use of sprayable is pretty much across the whole board. So most growers actually start with sprayables early in the season, and then they move into these other technologies. So there's a combination of technologies that are being deployed. And Brad and Emily in the previous session also talked about the other practices that we use in horticulture that might increase the risk. So this one, as Brad and Emily mentioned in the previous one, the summer pruning, of course, is one key factor where growers are aware that as soon as they do a summer pruning or ring thinning, where it changes the position of the fruit and suddenly you have the exposure of the fruit, any management that leads to a change or sudden exposure of the fruit, growers know that they normally come after that with an application of a sprayable, or they need to be conscientious of using an overhead cooling or netting strategy. Again, to not leave the cherries outside, I want to share that these techniques are also used widely in cherries, although the over-tree sprinkler irrigation in cherries is not a very common practice. This is work done by Matt Whiting 16 years ago, where they were evaluating the impact of shade net, surround, and overhead tree sprinkler and under tree sprinkler in the impact of the fruit surface temperature throughout the whole canopy and the sun exposed fruit. And in here, what they learned is that the shade net and surround actually had a very similar protection to the fruit. The best strategy, and remains to be the same for apples, that to cool the fruit, the best strategy continues to be the over-tree sprinkler, so evaporative cooling systems. And actually, what it was interesting in this work too is that the under-tree sprinkler or irrigating actually increases the fruit surface temperature. So it didn't help at all, or actually increases slightly the temperature in the orchard. I would like to finish by saying that there's a lot of other practices. Here I have a picture. This is a visit that we did with another project that has been and is a sponsor of this webinar series, is the Washington State University Ag AID. So this is a large project where the heat stress mitigation is a very important component. And we went to visit some orchards in Chile and some vineyards in Chile. And one of the things that they were doing is the canopy manipulation, which of course we can do in apples or cherries. And instead of growing as they used to, growing all the vines in a wall or a 2D wall, what they are doing now is that they're growing them in an open canopy to reduce the impact of the heat stress, also growing a lot of cover crops and crops throughout the orchard. So other practices that are relevant, of course, is having an adequate and good irrigation system, so you keep the trees and the roots in healthy conditions, canopy management, as the example that I have in this picture with wine grapes. Considering also root and the soil health, so there are studies. This is a webpage of Australia's work on heat stress, and they are evaluating the impact of compost, straw, or mow and throw. We call it throw and mow, but the same idea is to keep the root system healthier, but also improve the water retention, so that will lead to healthier trees. Use of mulches and ground covers, the genetic, which Brad also mentioned. There are studies that are evaluating the genetic, and especially thinking about the rootstock susceptibility to heat stress or drought. In very general terms, a more vigorous rootstock is more resilient to stress compared to a more dwarfing rootstock, but there are also some additional traits that are being evaluated more recently. This is another work that it had a different scope. This is a work that I did for bitter pit, actually manipulating the root growth early in the season. That's why you don't see any fruit or leaves in the trees. But with this work, actually, it was interesting to see how the extended or white reflective fabric can reduce the temperature in the ground and in the soil, and that can actually benefit, especially when you're working with dwarfing rootstock or exposed rootstock. We did some work years ago in Chile, looking at the stress of Gisela 6, using covers and trying to reduce the temperature in the ground. So that can be another option. Brad mentioned a lot about PGRs and nutrition. That's something that we have not explored as much. So be happy to chat with Brad and the growers in this site to learn more about your experience there. Okay, so with that, I would like to thank you. And this is just an image of our new ideas that we are looking for in the Ag group, of having drones with umbrellas. Actually, that's a joke. Doing that. And just thank you to the support that we had for the Smart Orchard project, the AgAID. And I had to mention all the team that is behind all the information that I put together here: Labcode, Basabaraj, Datatray, and Shrikant Gorti, which I see that Basabaraj is in the room, so we might go back to him in some point.
Very good. Thank you. The orchard of the future.
How ridiculous that would be.
Well, that's great. Thank you both for giving presentations and setting the stage for our panel discussion going forward. So if you do have questions, I've seen some messages in the chat too. Feel free to put those questions in the chat. So we'll switch to our panel now. And Brad and Bernardita, please stick around to be part of the panel discussion. But let's go and I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. So we've got folks from across North America, like I mentioned. So let's go ahead and start. And we've got two Garretts from Washington. Let's start there. Would you both introduce yourselves and tell us who you are and a little bit about your farm?
Well, I'm Garrett Henry. I work for Douglas Fruit Company. We grow apples, peaches, nectarines, and cherries, and a few apricots. Our orchards are located near Pasco, Washington, which is considered to be part of the Columbia Basin, and we're in South Central Washington.
Garrett Bishop. I work for GS Sloan Company, and I work with our 40 plus fieldmen and growers that they provide, and I'm quality services. So I'm our internal plant disease diagnostics person. So it comes from all the disorders on the pre-harvest side that I look at, and then also the post-harvest side as well.
Very good, thank you. And our grower from British Columbia, Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Hi guys, my name is Steve Brown. I live in Summerland, British Columbia, so close to the Summerland Research Station, if you've ever been there before. Just literally down the street from there. I've been doing horticulture consulting and field service work for over 20 years now. Yeah, and so I also have a high density apple orchard as well in Summerland as well. I've been running for over 20 years. Yeah, and then I've been doing YouTube videos actually specifically on picking and pruning and thinning and all that stuff, and actually just finished a YouTube video specifically on what we're talking about today. So there you go. You can check that out. If you want to check it out, you can go to YouTube and just type in Steve Brown apple color, and then it'll pop up. But we talk about all this kind of stuff in the video if you're interested.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's great. All right, and then Leslie Huffman, if you would introduce yourself.
You're on mute, Leslie.
There you go. Yeah, hi, I'm from Ontario. I guess I'm the Eastern voice here. I retired from working in extension in Ontario about 10 years ago. So in the last decade, I was working as an apple specialist as all the exciting high density techniques came into play in our province and your areas as well. We do have a small orchard here. We're in the most southerly orchard in Canada, so we're on the shores of Lake Erie, and which is the 42nd parallel. So we're actually south of we're on the northern equivalent to the northern boundary of California. So we do experience quite a bit of heat, have for a long, long time, and we do have variations in weather due to weather systems moving across the American Midwest and hitting the Great Lakes and going north and south. So sometimes we're wet and sometimes we're dry. We've had lots of issues with heat. Generally, many days over 30 degrees Celsius here, and lots of humidity. So all your work in Washington when you have 45 relative humidity, Bernardita, I can't even think of what that feels like because we've already had humidexes at 46 Celsius this year.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a bit different.
Yeah, similar to what Dan has in Western New York. I've been on IFTA tours in Western New York and felt about the same way.
Yeah, very good. All right. We also have Sean Kumar from Penn State, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm Sean Kumar. I'm an assistant professor of tree fruit and the state extension specialist for tree fruit up at State College in Pennsylvania. I also lead the state phenology and ripening updates program along with Don Seifert and Daniel Weber. our tree fruit extension educators, where we together take weekly measurements and send out phenology updates, as well as thinning recommendations, as well as ripening updates in the fall. And we've been doing this for the past 3 years. And we also do a lot of research on crop load management, on precision orchard technologies like variable rate spraying and drone spraying, as well as research on fruit quality, color improvement, and other aspects that are relevant to growers here in Pennsylvania. I manage about 6 acres of orchards, mostly high density, and a small block of peaches, mostly just a teaching block, but mainly do a lot of work with apples. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Am I missing anyone? I know some folks couldn't make it tonight, being it's the growing season, but am I missing anyone who is participating in the panel?
Emily, I think I forgot to mention kind of our farming conditions. I don't know if you want me to cover that.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, we're in the basin. We're generally about 6 to 8 inches of rainfall a year, and we get all of our water from the Columbia River where we're at. And in the winters, we kind of average high 20s generally. In the summers, July through August, we're kind of in the low 90s. Kind of bookended by 80s in like I said, be June and September. Where we farm, our soils are generally a fine sandy loam to silt loams. Our silt loams can have areas of pretty high pH, 7, 8, 8, 5 that we deal with, and significant secondary calcium carbonate accumulation in the subsoil, and which can create root restrictions and drainage issues. So that's kind of what we farm in.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting, and that's why we have you here as panelists, but just talking about these different growing conditions and different challenges that you all face. But we're all in this together, even though we're in different parts of the country. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sonia so she can ask some questions and we can hear from you about how you're dealing with the heat stress that Bernardita and Brad talked about.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, to kick it off, just an open question to share what techniques you used to mitigate heat stress and what you found with those. And I'll open it up to the panelists to volunteer.
I'll start first. I mean, we work with a lot of different growers, so I mean, from the presentations earlier, it's a combo of a lot of different ones. So, a lot of the products, the particle films or the clear coatings are used a lot in the state of Washington. And then you have the overhead cooling that Bernardina reviewed. Most growers I work with, if they're doing the cycling, there's a group that only does once it's on, it's on. Once it reaches 85 or 90, depending on the grower. Others do cycling where it's 10 minutes on and 20 minutes off. I'm a big fan of the cycling. You're using less water and you're actually letting evaporation work. And all that research was done with Larry Schrader at WSU a long time ago. And the coolest part of the fruit, because you're getting evaporation, you're getting that physical change from water to gas, is 8 minutes off to 16 minutes off is actually the coolest fruit surface temperature readings you'll get. And then it starts increasing from that 16 minutes to 20 minutes. And so that's another tool. And then depending on the variety and what growers want to do, and is shade netting's another possibility people do if the economics is there.
And yeah, I'd say we do it all, depending on our orchard and our system. We've got about 3,500 acres, and we farm about let's see, about maybe 9-10 locations. And depending on the age of the block, we generally start our overhead cooling at about 85. And where systems allow, we do cycle. We cycle, 10 to 15 on and off. Our overhead cooling, we, on our R10s, we cycle, and that system's about $1,000 an acre to put in. We have some old systems that are every 4 rows, and they're impacts and R2000s, and so we do cycle those if we can. Sometimes where they're older systems, and we'd have to have somebody actually turn the valves manually, and so we'll run those. Which those are the ones that can kind of create problems for us with just saturated soils. And then new for us, we're starting to get into the fogging. We're starting to look at the fogging. We've got a couple systems in. That's about $2,000 an acre to put in, but we do like that so far. I mean, we hear issues with the plugging, but for us so far, it hasn't been too much of a problem. One thing I'd say about the fogging is the nozzles. If you run the nozzles down the row, a lot of those leaves tend to capture the mist, the fog, and then you create puddles under the tree, and so you really kind of negate the benefit of the evaporation and not adding as much soil moisture to the ground. I know that because we did it. So when we turned them all the other direction, it was running perpendicular, then it was worked a lot better for us. And we do have netting. So we have ranches that we don't have enough water to overhead cool everything. So we have some blocks that we've netted. And I would say that we're seeing some little difference in how effective the netting is. Maybe too effective on some manufacturers. We've noticed that we're getting better fruit finish, better coloring with some than others, and some of you are even finding the fruit finish isn't very good. It's not coloring. The size is a little smaller, and even just side by side on the same ranch where we have one block that has it, one block that didn't, it was pretty noticeable. We've actually even gone back and added overhead cooling to some of the netted blocks, and not for sunburn control, but as we get closer to harvest to help bring fruit color on, and we've seen that make a huge difference. So we'll run that actually into the evening to get the field heat out of the block. Try to drop that daytime, try to drop that temperature faster, and we found that to be pretty effective in helping bring color on, especially on earlier summer varieties. We had some raves that we did that with, and Honeycrisp and Galas, the stuff on the front end. If we don't have shade, we don't have overhead cooling, then we do use surround on some varieties, and we use calcium carbonate products such as diffusion or mask on other varieties. Trialing. Right now, we're doing some work with WSU to utilize apple surface temperature to start overhead cooling instead of just a regular temperature, and then actually turn the foggers or the overhead cooling on and off. We'll cycle them based on temperature, not just on a 8 to 10 minute or 10 to 15 minute cycle. It'll automatically turn on and off based on the surface temperature. So we're looking at that. The previous work has shown it to save about 40% water, I think 40% plus, without increasing incidence of sunburn. So we're hopeful that that's effective, because with our soil types, some of our areas that really that creates this, tree health issues and fruit finish issues and fruit quality issues, storability. And the other thing we see is we're with our irrigation water by the end of the summer, we're kind of 8 to 8.5, and so we start accumulating bicarbonates and salts, and we start seeing leaf burn if we're running overhead cooling all summer. We have a hot summer, then it can create some tree issues, some leaf issues. The initial setup for that looks to be roughly around 3,000 a site. The gateway system's around 600, and we can use that for multiple sites. But with the water saving and impact on the trees, we think that's worth it if it works.
Talking
And I
about
would say, go ahead. Sorry.
fogging, which system were you talking about? That's that you can move around. You said that's 3,000 an acre.
Yeah, well, it's the actual setup to come in and put the gateway that picks up the signals, and put the nodes in the orchards, and put the monitoring devices, and we're part of a grant, so we didn't cover that cover all of that, but if it works, I mean, it would be, we would put that in. And we just, you could put one in a block and you could run probably blocks that are in similar, you know, if you have similar training systems and they're in proximity, I would imagine that you could set up just a couple and run multiple blocks off of one site. That would be our intention.
Okay.
So if I may add there, Garrett, Emily, for this, the setup is mostly, we have two goals. One is to monitor and the other one is to automate. So you can actually have the same setup of 3000 about that is for just the monitoring side. And the idea is that we can monitor any mitigation strategy. So if you use sunburn or fogging or overhead cooling, whatever, we can monitor that and tell you what's happening with the fruit surface temperature. But the next step, and that's what we are doing with Garrett and other growers, is to actually automate the system, whatever is, even if it's like overhead cooling, sprinkler, or fogging, that we automate that system based on those thresholds and conditions.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of other applications. You can set up soil moisture probes with that system, and you can set up with frost alarms with that system, things like that. So,
Okay, very good. Sorry to interject. Just curious.
Steve or Leslie, would you like to add from your locations?
Yeah,
Sure. Oh,
I can
go ahead, Leslie. Yeah.
from some Ontario growers. So I would say our growers are not as actively pursuing some of those techniques. We run into weeks of problems. We run into a lot of problems, particularly when you get to the end of Gala harvest and into ambrosia, which would be the second, third, fourth week of September, where color is lacking. We're not in a high color area. I see we have some Ontario growers on that are in better coloring areas, and particularly with ambrosia. We learned with them with Macintosh. So if you can't color Macintosh, you're in big trouble, and that's an early September, well, early to mid-September apple. We had a lot of growers using reflective mulch on Macintosh in the time when that was a really important cultivar, and really kind of perfected that issue or that technique. But some of this overhead cooling, our strawberry growers use a lot of evaporative cooling through the season. But in apples, I would be really, really, really concerned about fruit rots. And we're getting more and more different fruit rots as we go into especially storage apples, but even later in the season. I mean, we've spent the whole spring fighting scab, which I think Western growers don't even think about. And we've had a very wet spring. So we've got multiple fungicide applications on already. And now we're switching our fungicide base to get into dealing with summer diseases. We've got some new ones, bitter rots coming in, which used to be a southern issue. And we're seeing more and more of it. We're seeing more mummified fruit hanging in the trees. We've been discussing whether that's some of our aggressive thinning strategies are keeping more fruit mummies in there and a source of disease. So we just don't have the luxury of 40 or 50% humidity. We're up high every day, and sporulation is a fact of life here. So I just want to comment a little bit about irrigation. We have more and more growers going into irrigation. It's not a fact of life in Ontario here like it is in Summerland or in Washington. But as we've done the transition into high density orchards with more dwarfing rootstocks, more and more growers are irrigating. And I live in an area where we have thousands of acres of greenhouse vegetables, and those growers have learned to irrigate. They irrigate at night. They pre-fill the plants so that when heat stress comes, which is terrible in greenhouses in the daytime, but every growing system is different. But they have used this midnight to whatever time, like 6 o'clock, and I know that some of the citrus growers were using that in Florida to kind of pre-fill your plant so it tolerates some of this stuff. And I think that's possibly a more reasonable approach for moderate climates like Ontario. Maybe some of the other Eastern people have some comments.
Yeah, I agree with Leslie here in Pennsylvania. With a lot of comments you mentioned, Leslie, here in Pennsylvania as well, bitter rot is becoming more and more of an issue. And our pathologist Kerry Peter commonly mentions to growers about it to keep on the sprays and stuff like that. So I don't think I do worry about like overhead sprinkler systems with those sort of diseases. And mostly our growers, as far as heat mitigation, they mainly use sprayable products. And so for us, we have seen like some years sunburn effects are quite large. Like we see sometimes 15 to 20% damage in sunburn, but it's very specialized to certain locations. We are very unique in terms of our locations where we have orchards. It's extremely slopey, and we have very wide ranges of terrains. Some orchards are flat, a lot of orchards have a lot of terrain in them, and so certain locations, certain pockets, when you're at that area that has direct sunlight exposure, that's when you see sunburn. So it's usually not in covering an orchard completely. It's usually found in pockets where you have that heavy sunlight exposure, and we've seen that commonly in many orchards. So some growers take very active measures, other growers don't see it as a big problem to address, or they don't see damage rising up to the levels for them to address it, and it varies according to year. But mostly mitigation strategies that growers use are protective sprays, that a lot of which were talked about by Brad earlier, and kaolin clay and some of the calcium carbonate products and all of those are used, but those are the main ways in which we are dealing with heat stress. It's definitely becoming more and more of a problem as in the past few years, especially in spots that are heavily exposed to the sunlight. And so in Pennsylvania, we are blessed with, I feel like, good soils, silt, loam, clay, and then towards the central Pennsylvania we have a little bit more clay, but the southern belt, hugging the Mason-Dixon line and just north of Maryland, that's a really nice growing region. It's just that we have a lot of terrain variation right there, and then of course moving more north from that, we have Lancaster, Berks area that has also similar soil, but a little bit less of that terrain as compared to south central Pennsylvania. So slightly different growing areas, but share some of the similar concerns. And with newer varieties like Honeycrisp, and I mean, Honeycrisp is not super new, but with Honeycrisp and the progenies of Honeycrisp, like Evercrisp, for example, we are seeing regular sunburn especially in those pockets where you get that high sunlight exposure, and that seems to be a recurring thing that we're seeing in specific areas of orchard blocks.
Thanks, Sean.
If I could add that in 2024 we had a very early season, and it was I believe it was early June, probably before this date, and all of a sudden we had all of the sunburn symptoms like a week after we'd been in a cool spring. And it was at about, we also grow some trellis tomatoes, so I noticed the tomatoes all had the same sunburn. So I figured it happened about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had it on gala apples throughout everything and on ambrosia. And you think, so we just talked about it. We said, would you have sprayed surround this early in the season? You think, I never even think about it, right? Like it happens so early. So sometimes it's a random event, and it was a very early. It was a day when they were reporting very high UV ratings. So I've kind of I sunburn easily. I used to have red hair before it went white, but so I sunburn easily. I really watch UV ratings. And when it's early UV in the season, you can get into trouble with your fruit as well.
Thank you, Leslie, for that, because there's some work done. Matt Whiting did quite a bit of work in cherries, and one of the things that we haven't discussed so much, and I don't know how much we can control, is the adaptation. And so the trees, we see that they really adapt to heat resilience. If you come from a spring that is warmer, we have less impact of sunburn during the summer than when you come from a cool spring, which is the case probably in this season. Actually, it's been a wonderful spring. And so we are worried that a heat dome or a heat event coming at this time of the year can impact the fruit quality. And growers do apply sprayables when we expect that dramatic change in either the exposure, but also on the heat side. And just talking and thinking about that, I would like to ask Garrett and also the Sean what you were talking about. We think about sunburn. I agree that sunburn mitigation like fogging and water might not be applicable in the east side because of the roads. But what about how you manage heat independent of the sunburn? And if we have the chance, I don't know, Basabraj, if you are available, he did a very neat work looking at heat and the changes in color development and reversing the color between different mitigation strategies and heat conditions. So I would like to start with Basabarat if he's available. Otherwise, I would love to go back to you guys to share what you do for heat mitigation. We hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Bernardita. I think just on the last point, I would like to mention a bit which I didn't see much in the discussion, so I think I'll just put that out. One thing specifically we noticed while doing heat mitigation using netting is we were seeing a lot of like heat accumulation underneath the shade netting whenever we were trying to compare the shade netting with, let's say, either the sprinklers or foggers. And one thing that we specifically noticed is early in the season, the like when the fruits are still smaller, they start coloring up, and underneath the netting, when the heat starts accumulating, as we go through the season, the initial red color pigmentation that you will be seeing will be reversed back. So basically, the fruit that was looking little bit red or pinkish will start going back to becoming green or yellow. And then once the temperature starts getting cooler, that will again come back. But there is a catch here. If the temperatures doesn't come back to be cooler, then that's where the fruits underneath the netting will be delayed in terms of coloration. And in contrast to this, the foggers and overhead sprinklers will be much more ahead in terms of coloring. So this is one typical thing that we have seen in some of our trials. And this is, I think, both the years. So we did it for 3 years, but if we take 2 good years in that one, then this was consistent. Yeah.
I'd like to circle back to Steve and give you an opportunity to share what's happening up in Summerland. Up because I'm in Washington, so it's north from here. And then we'll continue on this track as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, I think most of the methods and techniques have already been covered already, so I won't bore you with all that. Maybe I'll just tell you the stuff that we're not using anymore. And I can't say for all growers, but for most growers, I would say most of the growers have gone away from kale and clay. It's proved to be kind of tough for many of our packers to deal with. Other thing we definitely noticed is, I mean, it definitely works in some ways, certainly for cooling the fruit down and kind of providing sunblock. But we also definitely noticed retarded color as well. So at harvest time, which was obviously not super great. Um, yeah, it was interesting. There's one comment just about the water, where just to give you a heads up, down in Washington State, you might be getting a little bit less down the Columbia River this year. We have not received much water, unfortunately, up in the mountains for the most part here in British Columbia, and of course you get our water once we're sort of finished with it, I guess. But yeah, just a caution there. We're gonna send down as much as we can, and obviously there's minimum flow rates, but it's gonna be pretty minimal. So. But we definitely, having said that, it's an issue for us this year for sure. We are because we rely primarily on overhead cooling, we found by far, as which has already been said, is that overhead cooling seems to be the most effective by far. And so that's what many of our growers primarily use. But again, that's an issue. If you're short on water, so just to give you an example, so Summerland is already at a reduced allocation by 20% already, and we're at stage 3 water restrictions. We're probably going to end up at stage 4 as soon as some of our big dams stop spilling way up in the mountains. And that will be a major problem. So that's actually one of our really big topics of discussion right now in the Okanagan Valley is what are we going to do instead of overhead cooling? Now we've tried many of the other practices, but like you say, they're not quite as effective, and also often very expensive. So we've had some of our growers try the overhead netting, not very many at this point. But who knows? Maybe we'll have to go back to more sprays and stuff. But again, we all know that the color that the buyers are expecting and the retailers are expecting has not gone down. It continues to go up, and that creates a big problem when we're spraying things on the fruit, especially like kaolin clay. Some of the other products aren't as bad. So anyway, yep.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any effort to try to reduce this expectation or the intense red color? It's not realistic.
What? Yeah, sorry, Leslie. I don't know if that question was at myself or just a general question. Yeah, we've definitely had that conversation too. And I don't know, that's probably more of like a consumer question or political question, maybe even, or maybe it's an advertising thing. I don't know, but maybe a good example. I mean, I think it is worth mentioning. Like ambrosia, for example, when that variety first came out, right? 30% number 4 color was essentially the maximum that you needed. That is not the case anymore. Most of our buyers are demanding much higher color, and it is a bicolored apple. It's not meant to be wraparound red all the way, and yet it is very easy for a buyer to request whatever they want to request, right? So I don't know, maybe that's a re-education thing and more of um, ad campaign awareness kind of thing. I don't know. It's a great question though, because it kind of does beg the question, it kind of gets to that point where you're trying to get more and more and more color for your fruit, which can be good in some cases, depending on the variety. It can increase the sugars as well. Usually that correlates with color. However, yeah, it is a great question, right? When is that kind of point? When do we have to kind of start pushing back a little bit and say, hey, this particular variety is not necessarily a wraparound red variety, as well? That's a great question.
to add to what Steve said earlier on, reduction of water, some of our growers, they'll do, and it kind of talks with Bernardita earlier, they'll delay some of their overhead cooling, especially early in the season, to let the fruit acclimate. Growers have seen that work really well, but it kind of really depends on what type of early season you get. Is it a slow increase in temps? That acclimation can work really well. If it's all sudden, we've been in the 70s and 80s and then it jumps up to 98, that's not going to work well. So it kind of really depends on what weather you get.
Yeah, and to circle back to Bernardita's question on what we do for general heat, as of now, we are seeing some of these spikes in temperature, some 90 plus, 100 plus, and this very specific days, especially sometimes in July and August. In August is when we are starting to harvest our fruit, and early August onwards. And so nothing specifically just for the heat, because we're not set up with any systems like overhead cooling or something like that. But the major impact, like you mentioned and Basavraj mentioned, was the impact on color that we struggle with here, and especially in Pennsylvania, much more than in the states that are north to us. They do see color issues as well, but for us it's even more because of the warmer temperatures that we see in August, and that is the primary effect of that heat that we see, the less color development. So we've been testing a lot of the nutrient products, a lot of the PGRs that were mentioned earlier by Brad, and some have varying levels of success. And they seem to be very environment specific in terms of when they work, especially of whether, especially when it comes to cost economics of actually running the fruit through commercial grader and really checking whether some of these products are worth their bang for the buck with improving color. And we've seen sort of minimal effects with nutrient products. Of course, we're keeping on trying some of these products that were mentioned for another year or 2 more years before we come up with recommendations. But we have seen some success also with PGRs, combination of PGR use, especially with a seed and retain, a combination of acid and retain mainly because we don't want to lose the quality characteristics that we need for storage, but a combination of combinations of acid with retain. It's definitely not silver bullet. There's a lot of, when it comes to PGRs, you know that there's a lot of environmental variation, but we're seeing some success with those combinations of acid and retain in helping improve color while also maintaining the characteristics that you would need for a regular harvest in terms of maintaining the firmness levels, maintaining the maturity such that it doesn't advance too much. And so we're seeing mixed success in different varieties, and I think there's still a few years of work that we need to do to sort of nail down some of the specifics on, you know, when to apply, how much to apply, and specifically for each varieties, because we have seen some fruit drop in some cases with these PGR combinations, so we want to avoid that. But these are some of the things that we're working on, and we're trying to help improve color here in Pennsylvania.
Sam, are
Thanks,
you
Sean.
mixing a seed with your retain applications? Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, we're testing along with other states like Michigan and New York as well, because the idea being that a seed is able to help improve the red color without the detrimental effect of reducing firmness and advancing maturity with the help of the retain application as well. So this is something that we're testing. Sharif from Virginia Tech has done a lot of work with multiple applications of a seed, but we're really looking to see if we can develop a protocol where it's just cost effective as well with just one application or maybe at max 2 applications, and see if we can work that into a protocol, especially for varieties like Honeycrisp that we are seeing color development issues for. And as far as color is concerned, at least as far as the market standards, I agree with the group that I think that the market standards are going to go for more and more red color, unless there is a nationwide campaign or something like that that is sort of a re-education sort of thing. But unless we have something like that, I think that the standards for color are going to improve or are going to increase the buyer standards for color. And we are seeing that as we speak every year for different varieties. It seems to be slowly creeping up, and because of partly because of the work that's going into that growers are doing to help improve color in their own orchards, and just the general standard that is going up. So
Well, we're at time, but maybe we'll just open it up for any final thoughts from our panelists on heat stress in general, or in particular something that came up but really hasn't been delved into in too much detail, are there particular cultivars or varieties that you are more concerned about or less concerned about?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just chiming in real quick. I noticed there has been a lot of research done at the Summerlin Research Station over the years. Actually, New Variety Development Council, I think, paid some of our scientists, including Peter Toivonen, to do some reflective material research. And the biggest takeaway that we came from that was that Mylar covers in many cases did definitely cause storage scald issues. So we actually in Canada here, we do not use those anymore. Like period, full stop. It was very, very obvious in the studies that were done that it was very detrimental. So I'm always surprised when I drive down to Washington State and there's guys still using them, I guess. I know they're kind of a quick throwaway one time, maybe cheaper or whatever, but anyway, that it just yeah, anyway.
Super interesting, Steve. I'm gonna look it up and share with the growers. I respect Peter's job quite a bit, so we'll see what we can share with the growers here. Yeah.
Was that just Mylar, or was that also the Extended?
Mylar, right?
No, it was just the Mylar. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
So quick, real quick, Steve, do you guys overhead cool up there?
Yeah, most of our growers do. You bet. Yeah, yeah.
And we haven't seen the same issues with our storability down here.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's different. Yeah, right. It could have been different climate slightly or something like that. Different. I mean, we have many soil types here for sure, so we could probably take that out of the equation. We did. There's quite a few replicates I think done in the trial, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting for sure.
And we have seen sunburn and scald if you put it on in the hot. You know, if it's going to get in the 90s or up there, you definitely can burn some fruit and you can create some issues for yourself. But I think we found if we I mean, we even run leaf blowers through now. We're trying to get color. We're running leaf blowers to try to expose fruit, and then we come in with Mylar even on top of that, and we'll run cooling into nighttime to drop the, like I said, to drop the the temperature to try to get that fruit to roll.
Yeah, we do all that as well for sure. Yeah, 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 absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I've got that all in that YouTube video that I linked on here. That's all in there. I talk about that quite at length for sure. Yeah.
Well, with the coming El Nino, I think this is a very timely topic, and they weren't talking very good predictions for 2027 because of that.
This is the big Nino.
Yeah,
which doesn't make any sense in Spanish, but
Garrett, Bishop, or Leslie, any other final thoughts before I hand it over to Emily to wrap up?
Just a fun one that most of you guys probably all know, but we didn't talk a lot about post-harvest, but you can get superficial scald on grannies, but sometimes I've seen it not identified correctly where you can get delayed sunburn. So they look very similar, but the delayed sunburn is always on the sun exposed side of the fruit versus the superficial scald.
Yeah, that's a great note. Actually, we can chat more about that at our next webinar too, because that will focus more on what happens after a heat event. So perfect prime, Garrett. Any other final thoughts or takeaways? I was curious, when you see a heat event coming, if it's been a cool spring, for example, and you see hot temperatures in the forecast, is there anything you can do at that point? Or if you haven't started your sunburn spray program, is it too late? Just any tips or kind of tidbits as a reaction to upcoming weather?
just go ahead and spray.
I concur. Yeah. Any of those sprayable products, whichever ones you've had the best success with, I think if you see something on the forecast, that's probably Actually, that's probably one of the only solutions growers in our region can do to sort of mitigate the effects. I don't know that it'll mitigate it completely, but it'll sort of help a little bit at least.
And something that Leslie added is just make sure that you have good irrigation and healthy trees prior to the heat event, so you fill the water bucket there. Make sure that they can transpire.
Bernardita, may I chime in with kind of a tangent here since we're talking about spraying products?
No, you may not.
Okay, then. Well, good night, everybody. Just something I noticed for those of you that are using seaweed extracts as part of a spray program. One of our growers is recently using this with one of those tower sprayers with 17 nozzles per side, and it left an awful lot of residue inside the sprayer and actually reduced their output by 10%. So it wasn't immediately obvious that was what was causing the problem, but once they completely disassembled the thing and started cleaning it, they realized that it left a thin film behind. So as somebody who calibrates these things on a regular basis, just a reminder that if you're using your sprayer for multiple purposes, you might want to check the calibration after using a product like that, because it may actually influence what it's putting out.
Great point, Daniel.
Hey, you're not going to
Now,
make
do they
another
usually,
rude comment?
Daniel, is that usually in a tank mix or is it sprayed by itself?
It was part of a. Let me think about this. No, it was sprayed by itself, if I recall what Bobby told me. We didn't realize that was the issue. We spent about 2 hours trying to figure out why it was refusing to, even after cleaning nozzles and filter baskets and everything else, it was refusing to come into calibration. And it was only when he started disassembling it that he realized it was leaving residues inside the entire system. So you really needed to, for the seaweed, you really needed to flush it very well in order to get rid of it. So it was something surprising because we hadn't had any experience with it. Our first experience showed that, you got to pay attention to that.
Yeah, that seems like a time-intensive situation of problem solving. So the good note, Daniel. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to our speakers and our panelists tonight. Really appreciate your time and your expertise, sharing your experiences, and just a couple other things to share before we wrap up tonight. The recordings for these videos will be available, and we can send those out and post those in the future. And for all of us in Extension and those of us planning the meetings, will be making sure to send that information out with our newsletters and email updates. So next week, please come back and join us. I think the World Cup will be finished by that point, so we won't have to worry about any conflicts there. But our next webinar does really speak to what Garrett mentioned earlier. So we're kind of following things through the season and finishing with storage issues. So what happens after a heat event occurs? When we talk about fruit maturity, what happens in storage and what things do we see coming up in storage as far as disorders and fruit quality. So please come back and join us for that same time next Thursday. And if you would just give us your feedback, you can click on the survey. Sonia, if you would put the survey link in the chat if you haven't done that already, please go ahead and do that and let us know what you think about the webinar series and give any feedback that you'd like to share. So thank you again and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.